the homeless woman had only one possession left in the world. An old blanket she refused to let go of. So when she wrapped that blanket around a freezing little girl she had just pulled from a wrecked car, everyone assumed she had sacrificed the only thing she owned. But 3 days later, her face suddenly appeared on every television in America. The breaking news wasn't calling her a hero. They were desperately trying to find her. Because the woman everyone believed was homeless had been missing for 23 years. And the truth behind her disappearance was so disturbing that several powerful people were already trying to erase every trace of her before she could remember who she really was. This wasn't just the story of a homeless woman. It was the story of a mother, a stolen identity, and a little girl who unknowingly saved the only person who could expose a decades-old secret. Stay with me until the very end, because the final revelation changes everything you think you know about this woman. Before we uncover the truth, take 2 seconds to subscribe and turn on notifications. These real-life inspired stories always reveal a twist no one sees coming, and you won't want to miss what happens when this woman's forgotten past finally catches up with her. Every morning before sunrise, the city came alive while people deliberately avoided looking at the woman sleeping beneath the old railway bridge. To most commuters, she was invisible. Some called her the Blanket Lady. Others simply crossed the street whenever they saw her. No one knew her names. Not even she was completely sure anymore. She answered to Grace, a name she believed belonged to her because it was embroidered in fading blue thread on the corner of the weathered blanket she carried everywhere. The blanket wasn't just for warmth. She guarded it with her life. She would rather go hungry than let anyone touch it. The other homeless people often joked that if someone stole her blanket, Grace would chase them across the entire city. She never laughed, because deep inside, she couldn't explain why that blanket felt more important than her own memories. Every night she experienced the same nightmare. A little girl crying, bright white lights, a loud screech of tires. Then, complete darkness. She always woke up trembling, unable to remember what happened next. The strange thing was, she couldn't remember much of anything before waking up on the streets years ago. No family, no birthday, no hometowns, only flashes. A woman's voice whispering, "Run," a man's angry scream, and tiny hands reaching toward her before everything disappeared into darkness. Doctors at free clinics believed she suffered from severe memory loss caused by trauma. Police had questioned her years ago, but found no missing person report that matched her. Eventually, everyone stopped asking questions. Everyone except one little girl. Every Friday afternoon, an 8-year-old named Lily walked past the bridge with her father after school. Unlike the adults, Lily always smiled at Grace. Sometimes she left behind a sandwich. Sometimes an apple. Sometimes nothing more than a cheerful, "Have a good day." Grace never expected kindness anymore. Yet somehow, that little girl's smile stirred a strange feeling inside her. A feeling she couldn't explain. Almost like she'd seen those eyes somewhere before. Neither of them knew it then. But in less than 24 hours, one impossible act of courage would bind their lives together forever. And the entire country would soon be searching for the woman everyone had forgotten. The following afternoon, dark clouds rolled over the city. A cold wind swept through the streets, and people hurried indoors as the first drops of rain began to fall. Grace sat beneath the railway bridge, carefully folding the old blanket into a neat square. She ran her fingers over the faded blue stitching. Grace. The name still felt strangely unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone else. A sharp pain suddenly shot through her head. She closed her eyes. For a split second, she saw a beautiful little girl with curly hair laughing in a park. The child was wrapped in the very same blanket. "Mommy, don't let go." The voice echoed inside her mind. Grace's eyes flew open. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Her breathing became uneven. She pressed her hands against her temples, desperately trying to remember more. Nothing. Just silence. Meanwhile, across town, 8-year-old Lily climbed into the passenger seat of her father's SUV after finishing her piano lesson. Her father, Daniel, glanced at the dark sky. "We should hurry home before this storm gets worse." Lily smiled as she buckled her seatbelt. "Can we stop by the bakery? I wanted to buy something for the blanket lady." Daniel smiled. "You really like helping her, don't you? She always looks lonely." Daniel's expression softened. Sometimes the people everyone ignores need kindness the most. Within minutes, the rain turned into a violent downpour. Thunder shook the streets. Traffic slowed to a crawl as visibility disappeared beneath sheets of rain. Back beneath the bridge, Grace watched the cars inch through the flooded intersection nearby. Something didn't feel right. She couldn't explain it. Her heart suddenly began pounding. Then, a deafening blast of a truck horn shattered the air. Grace looked up. A delivery truck was speeding downhill. Its tires skidded across the rain-soaked road. The driver slammed on the brakes. Nothing happened. The truck was completely out of control. Cars began swerving in every direction. People screamed. Metal crashed against metal. Grace's eyes locked onto one small white SUV trapped in the middle of the intersection. She recognized it instantly. Lily's. Time seemed to freeze. The truck slammed into the side of the SUV with a horrifying explosion of glass and twisting steel. The vehicle spun twice, then rolled onto its side. Everything went silent. For one terrifying second, no one moved. The crowd simply stared. Some reached for their phones. Others stood frozen in shock. No one ran toward the wreck. Except Grace. Without thinking, she sprinted into the pouring rain. Her bare feet pounded against the flooded pavement as fuel leaked from the crushed vehicle. Someone shouted, "Stay back, it could explode." Grace didn't even hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside the overturned SUV. Inside, Daniel was unconscious, trapped beneath the crushed dashboard. Blood streamed down his forehead. But Grace's attention was drawn to the back seat. Lily, the little girl's tiny hands were trembling. Her seatbelt had jammed. Smoke was beginning to rise from the engine. The child looked up through tears. "Please, help me." The sound of Lily's frightened voice struck Grace like lightning. Suddenly, another memory crashed into her mind. A little girl. The same terrified cry. The smell of smoke. A desperate voice shouting, "Save my daughter." Grace gasped. For a brief moment, she wasn't standing beside a crashed SUV. She was somewhere else. Years ago, holding a crying child in her arms while flames surrounded them. The vision disappeared. Reality rushed back. Smoke thickened around the vehicle. People were still too afraid to get close. Grace looked at the frightened little girl, then at the old blanket still clutched tightly in her hand. It had been her only possession, the only connection to a past she couldn't remember. Without a second thought, she wrapped the blanket around Lily's small body to shield her from the shattered glass. Then Grace reached into the wreckage, ignoring the flames, ignoring the pains, ignoring the terrified screams from the crowd. Because deep inside, something told her this little girl had to survive. Even if she didn't. The flames spread faster than anyone expected. Thick black smoke poured from beneath the overturned SUV, swallowing the sound of terrified screams. People stood frozen on the sidewalk. Some were recording. Others shouted for someone and anyone to help. But no one moved closer. Everyone was waiting for the firefighters. Everyone, except Grace. She ignored the heat scorching her face as she crawled through the shattered window. Glass sliced into her hands. She didn't even flinch. Her entire focus was on one frightened voice. Please don't leave me. Lily's tiny fingers reached toward her. Grace grabbed them immediately. It's all right, she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. I'm here now. For reasons she couldn't explain. Those words felt familiar. As though she'd spoken them before. Long ago. She reached for the jammed seatbelt. It wouldn't budge. She pulled harder. Nothing. Outside, someone screamed. The gas tank is leaking. Another voice yelled. It's going to explode, get out of there. Grace refused to listen. Instead, she wrapped the old blanket tighter around Lily's shoulders, protecting her from the broken glass. Then she braced one foot against the crushed seat and pulled with every ounce of strength she had. The seatbelt snapped free. Lily burst into tears. Grace lifted the little girl into her arms and carefully climbed back through the twisted metal. Just as she stepped onto the rain-soaked pavement, a weak voice echoed from inside the burning SUV. "Elle's Lily." Grace froze. It was Daniel, still trapped behind the crushed steering wheel. Blood streamed down his forehead as he struggled to stay conscious. His eyes searched desperately for his daughter. Grace looked at Lily in her arms, then back at Daniel. Without hesitation, she gently handed Lily to a terrified bystander. "Hold her. Don't let her out of your sight." Ignoring the shouts from the growing crowd, Grace turned and ran back toward the burning vehicle. The heat was almost unbearable. Smoke filled her lungs as she reached through the shattered driver's window. Daniel could barely keep his eyes open. "Your daughter," he whispered. Grace took his trembling hand. "She's alive. She's safe." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. A look of relief spread across his battered face. "Thank you." At that exact moment, the first firefighters arrived. "Ma'am, move away from the vehicle," one of them shouted. "We've got him." Grace stepped back only when she saw firefighters cutting through the twisted metal to reach Daniel. As they pulled him from the wreckage, his fading eyes met hers one last time before he lost consciousness. He would never forget the face of the woman who had risked her life twice. Once for his daughter, and once for him. The moment Grace reached Lily again, a deafening explosion erupted behind them. Boom! The force of the blast threw Grace forward. She instinctively twisted her body, shielding Lily from the flying debris. The two crashed onto the wet pavement as burning fragments rained around them. For several terrifying seconds, everything went silent. Then, Lily slowly opened her eyes. She was alive. Paramedics rushed toward them. One of them carefully lifted Lily into his arms. As he turned away, Lily reached back toward Grace. "No." She stretched out both hands. "I don't want to leave her." Grace forced a faint smile despite the pain. "You'll be okay." Then, her knees gave way. She collapsed onto the rain-soaked road. The last thing she saw before everything faded to black was Lily crying for her, and firefighters rushing Daniel into an ambulance beside her. Several hours later, Grace slowly opened her eyes. Bright hospital lights filled the room. Her hands were wrapped in bandages. Her shoulder was covered with thick white gauze. A nurse noticed she was awake. "Oh, thank goodness. You gave us quite a scare." Grace blinked, trying to focus. "The little girl." The nurse smiled warmly. "She's alive. And so is her father." Grace closed her eyes in relief. For the first time in years, she felt as though she'd done something that truly mattered. Meanwhile, just down the hallway, doctors had finally stabilized Daniel after emergency surgery. He remained unconscious for hours. When he finally opened his eyes, His first words were barely a whisper. "My daughter." A doctor nodded reassuringly. "She's safe." Daniel exhaled shakily. Then another question escaped his lips. The woman who saved us. Where is she?" The nurse hesitated. "We don't know much about her. She arrived without any identification. She says she can't remember who she is." Daniel stared silently at the ceiling. A woman with nothing had risked everything to save complete strangers. He made himself one promise. The moment he was strong enough to leave that hospital, he would find her. He would thank her properly, no matter how long it took. A short while later, 2 police officers entered Grace's hospital room. Grace's heart sank. She looked down at her torn clothes. "I know how this looks," she whispered. "I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to." One officer gently interrupted. "Ma'am, we're not here to arrest you." Grace looked confused. "Then why are you here?" The older officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "We just need to ask you a few questions. Can you tell us your full name?" Grace hesitated. I think it's Grace." "You think?" She lowered her eyes. "I don't remember. I haven't remembered for years." The officers exchanged another look. Then the older officer's eyes drifted toward the old blanket resting on the chair beside her bed. "May I see that blanket?" Grace nodded. "It's all I have." The officer carefully unfolded it. As he examined the faded blue embroidery, something caught his eye. Hidden beneath one worn corner, almost invisible after years of dirt and frayed stitching, was another line of embroidery no one had noticed before. He gently brushed it clean. His face suddenly drained of color. "What is it?" Grace asked nervously. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his phone. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to come to Memorial Hospital. I think we've just found her." Grace felt a chill run through her body. "Found who?" No one answered. Miles away, inside a television newsroom, a producer stared at a photograph that had just arrived from the police. It showed a homeless woman kneeling in the pouring rain, holding a frightened little girl wrapped in an old blue blanket. The producer zoomed in. His eyes widened. His coffee mug slipped from his hand and shattered across the newsroom floor. He turned to his editor and spoke only 6 words. "Put this on every channel, now." Because within hours, the entire country would see Grace's face. Not as a homeless hero, but as the woman who had been missing for 23 years. And somewhere, watching that same news broadcast, a powerful man nearly stopped breathing. For 23 years, he had made sure Grace would never be found. Now, she was alive, and she was beginning to remember. By sunrise, every major television network carried the same breaking news. The image was impossible to ignore. A frail, homeless woman, her clothes soaked with rain, her face streaked with blood, holding a terrified little girl wrapped in an old blue blanket. The headline read, "Do you know this woman? Authorities search for mystery hero after shocking rescue." Within minutes, the story spread across social media. Millions shared the photograph. Some called her an angel. Others wanted to donate money. But no one knew her names. Except one person, hundreds of miles away. Behind the gates of a secluded estate, an elderly man sat alone in a dimly lit study. The television remote slipped from his hand. His breathing became uneven. He stared at the screen as though he had seen a ghost. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." His trembling fingers reached for the television. The reporter continued. Police believe the woman suffers from severe memory loss. Authorities are asking anyone with information to come forward. The old man's face turned pale. His voice cracked. She wasn't supposed to be alive. A family portrait hung on the wall behind him. Before anyone else could notice, he hurried over, removed it, and pulled another faded photograph from the back of the frame. It showed a smiling young woman in her 20s. She was holding a little girl, wrapped in the exact same blue blanket. The woman in the old photograph was Grace, 23 years younger. The old man stared at the picture with tears in his eyes. "They found you." Before he could finish speaking, his office door burst open. A sharply dressed man in an expensive suit walked inside. His name was Victor. Calm, polished, dangerously composed. He glanced at the television, then at the photograph in the old man's trembling hands. His expression darkened. "So," Victor said quietly, "she's alive." The old man looked at him in horror. "You told me she was dead." Victor's eyes never left the television. "I believed she was. You don't understand what this means. If she remembers." He stopped himself. The room fell silent. The old man stepped closer. "What are you hiding from me?" Victor slowly folded the photograph and slipped it into his pocket. "You don't need to know. What matters now is making sure she never remembers." Meanwhile, at Memorial Hospital, Grace sat quietly beside the window. She watched the rain slide down the glass. Her bandaged hands rested on her lap. The blanket was folded neatly beside her bed. She couldn't stop staring at it. The nurse had just left after telling her she was becoming famous. "People all over the country are looking for you," the nurse had smiled. Grace didn't understand. Why would anyone search for someone like her? She had no family, no homes, no past, or so she believed. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up. Standing in the doorway was Daniel. His arm rested in a sling, a bandage wrapped around his forehead. Walking beside him was Lily. The moment Lily saw Grace, she broke into a run, ignoring every instruction from the nurses. She threw her little arms around Grace as gently as she could. "I knew you'd wake up." Grace smiled through tears. "So did I." Lily reached into her backpack. "I brought you something." She handed Grace a small paper bag. Inside was a warm loaf of bread, an apple, and a handwritten card. Grace slowly unfolded it. In shaky handwriting it read, "You saved my best friend, my daddy. Now you're part of our family." Grace's hands began to tremble. Part of our family. The words echoed deep inside her. Without warnings, another memory crashed into her mind. A little girl's laughter. Tiny footsteps running across a wooden floor. Someone calling out, "Dinner's ready." A man's gentle voice answering, "Grace, she's just like you." Then, a loud crash. Screaming. Glass shattering. Darkness. Grace clutched her head. Daniel immediately stepped forward. "Grace." Her breathing became frantic. I saw something." "What did you see?" Daniel asked softly. "I don't know. There was a little girl. The man. The home. And then..." She squeezed her eyes shut. It all disappeared. Daniel exchanged a worried glance with the nurse. Her memories were returning, piece by piece, exactly as the doctors had hoped. But neither Daniel nor Grace realized. Someone else already knew. Outside the hospital, a black SUV slowly pulled into the parking lot. Its windows were completely tinted. Inside, Victor watched Grace's hospital room through a pair of binoculars. His jaw tightened as he saw Daniel and Lily sitting beside her. So, he murmured, "She's not alone anymore." He reached for his phone. After a brief pause, he gave a cold, chilling order. "She's starting to remember. Move tonight. No mistakes this time." The call ended. Victor never took his eyes off Grace's window. Inside the hospital, Grace laughed quietly as Lily held her hand. For the first time in over 2 decades, she didn't feel invisible. She felt safe. She had no idea that before the night was over, someone would try to make her disappear again. That night, Memorial Hospital was unusually quiet. The hallways echoed with the distant hum of medical equipment. Most of the lights had been dimmed. Patients slept peacefully behind closed doors. But on the 4th floor, someone wasn't sleeping. Grace sat upright in her hospital bed, unable to close her eyes. Lily's handwritten card rested in her lap. She had read it at least 20 times. "Now you're part of our family." No one had called her family in over 23 years. The thought warmed her heart. Yet it also filled her with an ache she couldn't explain. Who had she been before all this? Did someone somewhere once wait for her to come home? Or had everyone already given up? As she reached for the old blanket, her fingers brushed against the faded embroidery once again. A strange feeling washed over her. Suddenly, she heard it. A little girl's laughter. Not from the hallway. Not from another room. Inside her mind. Then came another voice. Soft. Familiar. "Promise me you'll always protect her." Grace gasped. The blanket slipped from her hands. Before she could make sense of the memory, a loud metallic click echoed outside her door. She frowned. That wasn't the sound of a nurse. The handle turned slowly. The door opened just enough for a man dressed as a hospital orderly to step inside. He wore a surgical mask pulled high over his face. A hospital ID badge hung around his neck. But something about him felt wrong. He smiled. It never reached his eyes. "Ms. Grace." The doctor ordered one more scan before morning. Grace looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m. "I thought the tests were finished." "They found something. We shouldn't wait." His voice was calm. Too calm. Grace hesitated. The man stepped closer. "I'll take your blanket. You won't need it." For the first time, fear crept into Grace's chest. She instinctively pulled the blanket closer. "No." The man's smile disappeared. "I said, you won't need it." At that exact moment, Grace noticed his ID badge. The hospital logo was upside down. Her heartbeat quickened. He wasn't hospital staff. The man reached inside his coat. Grace's eyes widened. A syringe. Its needle glinted beneath the fluorescent lights. He lunged toward her. Grace screamed. The blanket slipped to the floor as she scrambled backward. The man grabbed her wrist. "Stop fighting. You've caused enough trouble already." Grace stared at him in horror. "What do you mean?" His grip tightened. "You were never supposed to be found." Before he could inject her, the hospital door flew open. "Get away from her." Daniel, still weak from surgery, still wearing his hospital gown. He had been unable to sleep and had decided to check on Grace after feeling uneasy. Without thinking, he threw himself at the attacker. The syringe flew across the room. The two men crashed into a tray of medical equipment. Alarms blared. Grace stumbled out of bed. "Nurse, help." The attacker shoved Daniel violently into the wall. Daniel cried out in pain as his injured shoulder struck the corner of a cabinet. Ignoring the agony, he stood back up. "You'll have to go through me." The masked man sneered. "I was hoping you'd stay asleep." He swung at Daniel again. But before he could land another blow, hospital security burst into the room. The attacker glanced toward the hallway. Too many witnesses. Too little time. He ran. Security officers chased him down the corridor. Moments later, the emergency exit slammed shut. By the time they reached the parking lot, he was gone. Only a black SUV was seen speeding into the darkness. Minutes later, police officers flooded Grace's room. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, breathing heavily. The doctor examined his shoulder. "You've reopened part of your surgical wound." Daniel barely listened. His eyes remained fixed on Grace. "Are you all right?" Grace nodded slowly. "I think so." Then she looked at the detective. He said something. The detective leaned forward. "What exactly did he say?" Grace swallowed hard. "He said, 'You were never supposed to be found.'" The room fell silent. The detective's expression changed instantly. This wasn't a random attack. Someone had specifically come for Grace. Someone who knew exactly who she was, or feared who she might become. Across town, Victor stood inside his office, staring out at the city lights. His phone rang. He answered without speaking. A nervous voice came through. "She escaped." Victor closed his eyes. And Daniel intervened. For several long seconds, Victor said nothing. Then he spoke in a voice colder than ice. "I warned you. No mistakes. You've just made one." The caller trembled. "What do we do now?" Victor slowly turned toward the old photograph of Grace lying on his desk. His fingers rested on her smiling face. "If she survives long enough to remember," he whispered, "everything we've buried dies with us." He ended the call, then reached for another phone. This one had no contacts saved. Only a single number. When the call connected, he gave one chilling instruction. "Activate phase 2. No more pretending. This time, bring me the blanket." Because Victor knew something no one else did. The blanket Grace had protected for 23 years was never just a blanket. Hidden within its worn fabric was the one piece of evidence that could destroy lives, expose a crime that had remained buried for decades, and finally reveal why Grace had disappeared in the first place. But before we uncover what's been hidden inside that blanket for 23 years, take a quick second to subscribe if you're enjoying the story. These emotional mysteries only get more intense from here, and trust me, you don't want to miss what Grace is about to discover. Now, let's find out why powerful people were willing to kill for an old blue blanket. The attack changed everything. By sunrise, 2 police officers stood outside Grace's hospital room. Another remained inside. No one entered without permission. The hospital no longer saw Grace as just a patient. She had become someone who needed protection. But Grace wasn't thinking about the attack. She couldn't stop thinking about the attacker's final words. "You were never supposed to be found." Found by whom? Found for what? And why had he wanted the blanket more than anything else? Later that morning, the detective returned. His name was Detective Harris. He placed the old blue blanket carefully across the table between them. "I need your permission," he said gently. "We'd like our forensic team to examine this." Grace immediately pulled it closer. "No," Harris nodded. "I understand. But someone risked breaking into a hospital to steal it. I don't think that's a coincidence." Daniel, sitting quietly beside Lily, looked at Grace. "I know that blanket means everything to you. But if it holds the answers you've been searching for, maybe it's time. Grace stared at the worn fabric. For 23 years, it had been her only companion, her only comfort, her only connection to a life she couldn't remember. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, but don't damage it. You have my word, Harris replied. An hour later, inside the forensic laboratory, experts examined every inch of the blanket, the faded embroidery, the worn stitching, the frayed edges. Everything appeared ordinary, until one technician noticed something unusual. Hold on. He adjusted the overhead light. There are 2 layers of fabric here. Detective Harris stepped closer. What do you mean? This corner has been sewn twice. Very professionally. It wasn't repaired. It was hidden. The technician carefully removed a few loose stitches. A tiny folded piece of waterproof material slipped onto the table. Everyone froze. Inside it was an old memory card, no larger than a postage stamp. The room fell completely silent. Detective Harris looked at the evidence technician. Can you recover what's on it? The technician nodded. If it hasn't been damaged by time. Yes. Back at the hospital. Grace suddenly clutched her chest. A wave of dizziness overwhelmed her. Another memory struck without warning. She was running, holding the same blue blanket tightly against her body. Rain poured from the sky. A little girl cried somewhere behind her. A man's voice shouted, Grace, don't stop. Then, another voice. Cold, furious. Take the child. Don't let her escape. Grace screamed. The vision shattered. Daniel rushed to her side. What happened? She was shaking uncontrollably. I heard them. He told me to run. Someone else said. She struggled to breathe. They wanted the child. Lily slowly reached for Grace's hand. It's okay. I'm here. Grace looked into Lily's eyes. For just a moment, they looked exactly like the little girl from her memories. The same fear, the same innocence, the same desperate eyes. A tear rolled down Grace's cheek. I've seen those eyes before. Daniel's heart skipped. What are you saying? I don't know. I just know. I've held a little girl like this before. Across the city, Victor sat inside his office. A man hurried in. They've taken the blanket to forensics. Victor's face hardened. How long before they find it? The man lowered his head. If they're thorough. Today. Victor stood so suddenly that his chair crashed onto the floor. No, they cannot see what's inside. He walked toward the window. For the first time, the calm, calculating man showed fear. Real fear. He turned to his assistant. Prepare the car. We're going to the forensic lab. The assistant hesitated. Shouldn't we let someone else handle it? Victor's eyes became ice. For 23 years, I've trusted other people. They failed me every single time. This ends today. Meanwhile, at the forensic laboratory, the technician carefully inserted the old memory card into a recovery device. Everyone watched the computer screen. The monitor flickered. Loading. Loading. Then, a folder appeared. Its title contained only one word. Grace. Detective Harris held his breath. The technician clicked it open. Inside was a single video file. Recorded exactly 23 years ago. As the technician pressed play, the screen filled with static. Then, a young woman appeared. She was crying, holding the very same blue blanket. Detective Harris's eyes widened. It's her. It was Grace, 23 years younger, looking directly into the camera. And the very first word she spoke sent chills through everyone in the room. If you're watching this, it means they finally found me. The room fell into complete silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Detective Harris stared at the monitor as the young woman on the screen wiped tears from her face. It was Grace, not the frightened woman lying in a hospital bed today, but a confident young mother. Her hair was neatly tied back. Her eyes were filled with fear. Yet beneath that fear was determination. She looked directly into the camera, as if she knew this moment would one day come. Slowly, she began to speak. If you're watching this, it means they finally found me. My name is Grace Carter. I don't know if I'm alive, or if they've already succeeded. But if this video still exists, then the truth still has a chance. Detective Harris quickly signaled for another officer. Record everything. This changes the entire investigation. Grace continued speaking. If you're seeing this, I've hidden the memory card inside my daughter's blanket. It was the only place I knew they would never think to look. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, as though someone might burst into the room at any second. Then she looked back into the camera. There are people after us. They don't want my daughter to live. And they will stop at nothing to silence me. Every officer in the room exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't paranoia. Grace sounded like someone who knew exactly what she was running from. She reached off camera, then gently lifted a little girl into her lap. The child couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She had bright, curious eyes, curly hair, and she clutched the same blue blanket with tiny hands. Detective Harris leaned closer. Is that? One of the forensic technicians whispered. Her daughter. Grace kissed the little girl's forehead. If anything happens to me, please, protect her. My daughter has done nothing wrong. She deserves a life free from fear. The little girl smiled at the camera, then softly waved. Detective Harris felt a lump rise in his throat. Who was she? Where had she gone? And why had no one been looking for her? Suddenly, the video crackled with interference. Grace looked toward a window. Her face changed instantly. She had heard something. They're here. She stood up so quickly the camera shook. The little girl began crying. Grace pulled her close. If I don't make it, there's one person you must never trust. She leaned toward the camera, almost whispering. His name is... The screen exploded into static. The audio distorted into loud bursts of noise. The image froze. Then, the video ended. No, Detective Harris shouted. The technician frantically checked the file. It's corrupted. The last few seconds are gone. Harris slammed his hand on the desk. The one name we needed. And it's missing. At that exact moment, the laboratory lights flickered. Once, twice, then the entire building went dark. Emergency lights glowed red across the hallways. A security guard reached for his radio. Power outage. No, another guard answered. The backup generator isn't responding. Outside, a black SUV rolled silently into the laboratory parking lot. Victor stepped out. He looked up at the darkened building. They've seen the video. His voice was barely above a whisper. We're too late. Several masked men emerged from the SUV behind him. Victor looked at each one. The memory card. The computer. Destroy both. No witnesses. They disappeared into the darkness. Back at the hospital, Grace sat quietly beside the window. She couldn't explain it, but her heart suddenly began racing. It felt as though someone had just spoken her name. Daniel noticed. "What is it?" Grace looked toward the rain-covered glass. "I don't know. She pressed a hand against her chest. "It feels like a part of me just woke up." Without warnings, another memory flashed before her eyes. She saw herself, 23 years younger, holding a little girl tightly, running through a train station. People shouting, footsteps chasing them. Then, a man's face. Sharp features, cold eyes. He smiled as he raised a phone to his ear. Grace gasped. "I've seen him." Daniel leaned forward. "Who?" She closed her eyes tightly. "I don't know his name, but he's the one chasing me. The same man. The same eyes." Before Daniel could respond, the television mounted in Grace's room suddenly switched to a breaking news report. The reporter spoke urgently. "We're receiving reports of an armed incident at the city forensic laboratory. Police have sealed off the area. The cause remains unknown." Grace's heartbeat quickened. For reasons she couldn't explain. She knew. Whatever answers had been hidden inside that blanket, someone was trying to erase them. Again, and across the city. As Victor walked through the dark forensic laboratory, he stopped in front of the computer that had just played Grace's video. The monitor was still glowing. The final frozen image remained on the screen. It showed young Grace, looking directly into the camera. Victor stared at her for several seconds. Then, for the first time in 23 years, he whispered the truth aloud. "I'm sorry, Grace, but you should have stayed dead." And with one swing of a metal crowbar, he smashed the computer screen into pieces. Not realizing, the forensic technician had already copied the video and hidden the duplicate before the lights went out. The city woke to shocking headlines. Armed men storm forensic laboratory. Critical evidence missing in mystery hero case. Television reporters stood outside the damaged building as police blocked every entrance. To the public, it looked like an attack on a government facility. But Detective Harris knew better. It wasn't the laboratory they wanted. It was Grace, and whatever she had hidden for 23 years. Inside Memorial Hospital, 2 uniformed officers now guarded Grace's room around the clock. No visitors were allowed without Detective Harris's approval. Daniel remained by Grace's side despite repeated requests from the doctors to continue resting. Lily sat quietly beside Grace's bed, coloring in a small sketchbook. Every few minutes, she looked up to make sure Grace was still there, as if she feared Grace might disappear the way nightmares disappear when you wake up. Grace smiled softly. "I promise, I'm not going anywhere." She hoped she was telling the truth. Several hours later, Detective Harris entered the room. His face was exhausted. His suit was stained with dust from the forensic lab. Daniel immediately stood. "What happened?" Harris closed the door behind him. "They attacked the laboratory. They destroyed nearly everything." Grace's heart sank. "The video?" Harris nodded. "They tried to erase it." A heavy silence filled the room. Then, a faint smile appeared on the detective's face. "But they failed." Everyone looked at him. "One of our forensic technicians copied the video moments before the attack." Grace let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So, it's not gone?" "No." Harris carefully removed a small encrypted flash drive from his pocket. "It's safe. For now." He pulled a chair closer to Grace. "There was something else." The video may have been damaged, but our audio specialists managed to recover a few seconds from the corrupted ending. Grace's hands began trembling. What did it say? Harris pressed play. Static crackled through the room. Then, young Grace's frightened voice returned. There's one person you must never trust. Maury static. Then, just 2 words. Victor. The recording crackled again. Across. The room fell silent. Grace stared blankly ahead. Victor Cross. The name echoed inside her mind. Once. Twice. Again. Suddenly. Pain exploded through her head. Grace cried out. Her hands flew to her temples. Another memory burst into focus. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing inside a large office. A younger Victor faced her across a desk. He was smiling. Not kindly. Coldly. You should have signed the papers, Grace. I'll never let you take her, Grace heard herself say. Victor stepped closer. You don't get to decide anymore. The vision shifted. She saw herself grabbing the blue blanket, scooping up the little girl, running toward the door. Victor shouting behind her. If you leave, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. The memory shattered. Grace opened her eyes with a gasp. I know him. Daniel leaned forward. Do you remember? Grace nodded slowly. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Victor Cross. He wasn't chasing a stranger. He was chasing me. Detective Harris took out his notebook. Grace, who is Victor Cross? Grace closed her eyes again. Fragments continued flooding back. I don't remember everything, but I remember enough. He wanted something. No, she corrected herself. He wanted someone. She looked at Lily, then whispered, My daughter. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Grace's breathing became uneven. I had a daughter. I remember holding her. I remember running with her. I remember promising I would never let anyone take her. She looked desperately at Detective Harris. But I can't remember what happened after that. Did they take her? Did she survive? Is she still alive? No one had an answer. At that same moment, across the city, Victor stood inside a private chapel. The room was empty, except for rows of old wooden pews. At the front, beneath a stained glass window, sat a small white gravestone. No body was buried beneath it. Only a name. Victor stared at it in silence. The inscription read, Emily Carter, beloved daughter, gone too soon. Victor gently brushed dust from the stone, then whispered, I gave you a funeral, so no one would ever look for you. He closed his eyes. But if Grace remembers, she'll realize the grave is empty. And then, they'll start searching. For the first time, fear overtook him completely. Back at the hospital, Grace couldn't stop shaking. She looked at Lily, then at the old blanket folded beside her bed. I know this sounds impossible, she whispered, but every time I look at her, I feel like I'm looking at my own child. Daniel's heart tightened. He reached for Grace's hand. Memory doesn't always return all at once. Maybe she's reminding you of your daughter. Grace slowly nodded. I hope so. Because if her daughter had survived, she would be about Lily's age. No. Grace suddenly froze. Her eyes widened. She began counting under her breath. No, that's impossible. Detective Harris noticed the change immediately. What is it? Grace looked up at him. Her face drained of all color. My daughter wouldn't still be a child. She whispered. 23 years have passed. If she's alive. She's a grown woman now. The realization hit everyone at once. Somewhere, if Grace's daughter had survived that terrible night, she had spent 23 years believing her mother was dead. Or worse, never knowing who she really was. And hidden somewhere in the city was the one person who knew exactly where she had been all this time. Victor Cross. The hospital room fell silent. No one knew what to say. Grace stared at the blanket resting across her lap. For 23 years, she had believed she was completely alone. Now, she knew two things. She had once been a mother, and somewhere, her daughter might still be alive. But if that was true, who had raised her? Who had told her the story of her missing mother? Or worse, had anyone ever told her the truth at all? Detective Harris broke the silence. Grace, I think it's time you heard something we discovered this morning. He opened a thin case file and carefully removed several documents. After recovering Victor Cross's name, we reopened every missing person report, adoption record, and sealed court file connected to him. Daniel leaned forward. What did you find? Harris took a deep breath. Victor Cross never had biological children. Grace frowned. Then whose grave was that? Harris continued. But 23 years ago, he suddenly became the legal guardian of a 3-year-old girl. Grace's heart nearly stopped. No, Harris slowly nodded. The adoption paperwork was sealed. The judge who approved it died years ago. And several pages are missing. Daniel whispered. Someone erased the records. Exactly. Harris placed a photograph on Grace's bed. It showed a little girl. Curly hair. Bright eyes. Holding a worn blue teddy bear. Grace's hands trembled violently. I know her. She whispered. I know this little girl. Another memory crashed into her. She saw herself kneeling in a garden. The little girl laughed as butterflies landed on her tiny fingers. Grace heard herself say, Emily, don't run too far. Emily. The name struck her like lightning. Tears poured down her face. My daughter. My baby's name was Emily. Lily quietly wrapped her small arms around Grace. Grace hugged her tightly. Not because she mistook Lily for Emily, but because, for the first time in 23 years, she remembered her daughter's name. At that exact moment, across town, Victor Cross sat alone inside his office. The television played the latest news. Reporters announced that police were making progress in identifying the mystery surrounding Grace. Victor switched the television off. His hands were shaking. A knock came at the door. His assistant stepped inside. Sir, we've located Emily. Victor didn't look surprised. I know where she is. The assistant hesitated. No, sir. I mean, we found her. Victor slowly turned. What are you talking about? The assistant handed him a tablet. On the screen, a young woman was being interviewed outside the hospital. The reporter asked, Why did you come here today? The woman fought back tears. I saw the homeless woman on the news. I don't know why. But the moment I saw her face, I felt something. She paused. It was like I'd spent my entire life looking for someone. And suddenly, I found her. Victor's face turned completely white. No, he whispered. She wasn't supposed to see that broadcast. The assistant swallowed nervously. She's already spoken to the police. Victor's breathing became heavy. How much does she know? We're not sure. Victor closed his eyes. For 23 years. He had controlled every piece of the truth. Now, everything was slipping away. He opened a drawer. Inside lay an old silver locket. He stared at it for several long seconds, then snapped it shut. Bring the car. If Grace and Emily meet, it's over. Back at the hospital, Detective Harris received an urgent phone call. His expression changed immediately. He looked at Grace, then at Daniel. Someone is here asking to see you. Grace frowned. Who? Harris hesitated. I haven't allowed her in yet. She claims, his voice softened, that her name is Emily. Grace stopped breathing. Daniel looked at the detective in disbelief. Lily squeezed Grace's hand. The room became so quiet. The sound of the heart monitor echoed like thunder. Grace's lips trembled. No, she whispered. It can't be. Harris nodded slowly. She's waiting downstairs. She says she doesn't know if you're her mother. But she's carried one question her entire life. Grace's eyes filled with tears. What question? The detective looked down at the statement in his hand, then quietly read the final sentence. If my mother didn't abandon me, why did she never come back? Grace broke down. 23 years of pain. 23 years of stolen memories. 23 years of believing she had lost everything had led to this one heartbreaking moment. Just one floor below, a grown woman waited, completely unaware that the mother she had mourned her entire life was only an elevator ride away. And somewhere outside the hospital, Victor Cross stepped out of his black SUV. He looked up at Grace's hospital window, then toward the main entrance. His eyes settled on a young woman standing alone, holding a faded photograph in trembling hands. Emily, Victor whispered to himself. Forgive me, because after today, one of you isn't leaving this hospital. For several long moments, Grace couldn't move. Her entire body trembled. Every heartbeat echoed louder than the one before. Only one thought filled her mind. Emily is alive. The little girl she had spent 23 years searching for. The child she had risked everything to protect. Was only one floor below her. Tears streamed down Grace's face. I have to see her. Detective Harris gently nodded. You will. But first, he looked toward the two officers standing outside the room. We have to make sure it's safe. Because Victor Cross was still out there. And after everything that had happened, no one was taking chances. Downstairs, Emily sat alone in the visitors' lounge. She clutched an old photograph so tightly that its edges had begun to bend. It showed a smiling young woman holding a 3-year-old girl wrapped in a familiar blue blanket. The photograph had arrived anonymously on her doorstep only 3 days earlier. There was no return address. No letter. Just one sentence written on the back. Your mother never abandoned you. Ever since receiving it, Emily had been unable to sleep. Then she saw the news. The homeless woman. The blue blanket. The same eyes from the photograph. She knew she had to come. Even if it shattered everything she believed. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, Victor watched from inside his black SUV. His knuckles turned white around the steering wheel. He had spent 23 years controlling the story. 23 years convincing everyone, including Emily, that Grace had abandoned her. If mother and daughter spoke, everything would collapse. His lies, his influence, his reputation, his freedom. He reached for the passenger seat. The silver locket lay exactly where he had left it. Inside it was a tiny photograph. One side showed a young Grace smiling. The other, a little girl laughing in her mother's arms. Victor stared at it. A tear rolled down his cheek. "I never wanted this," he whispered. Then his face hardened. "But I can't let the truth destroy what's left." He stepped out of the SUV, walking toward the hospital entrance. Inside, Detective Harris's phone suddenly rang. He answered immediately. Seconds later, his expression changed. "Seal every entrance," he shouted. "Victor Cross is in the building." Hospital security sprang into action. Officers rushed through the corridors. Patients and visitors were quickly moved into secure areas. Daniel instinctively stood in front of Grace. "You stay behind me." Grace shook her head. "No, I've spent 23 years running. I'm done hiding." At that very moment, the elevator doors opened. Emily stepped out. She had slipped away before security could stop her. She looked down the hallway. At the far end, a frail woman slowly stood from her hospital bed. Their eyes met. Time stopped. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. It was as if 23 years of pain had disappeared in a single heartbeat. Grace took one hesitant step forward, then another. Tears blurred her vision. "Emily," her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." Emily stood frozen. The words she had waited her entire life to hear were finally in front of her. "But," her voice trembled, "they told me you left me." Grace shook her head desperately. "I fought for you. I ran with you. I hid you. I came back for you. But someone stole my memories. And stole my life." Emily stared into her mother's eyes. She saw something no lie could ever fake. Love, the kind that survives 23 years of silence. With a cry that echoed through the hallway, Emily ran into Grace's arms. Mother and daughter held each other tightly. Neither wanted to let go. Daniel quietly turned away, wiping tears from his eyes. Even Detective Harris struggled to hide his emotions. Lily smiled through tears. They found each other. She whispered. Suddenly, a voice echoed down the hallway. "Grace." Everyone turned. Victor stood at the end of the corridor. His shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of him. Police officers surrounded him from every direction. He looked at Grace, then at Emily. For the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked broken. Grace stepped forward. "Why?" Victor lowered his head. "When your husband died, he left evidence proving that I had stolen millions from families through my charity. He was going to expose me." Grace's eyes widened. "So I tried to buy your silence. When you refused." His voice cracked. "I arranged the crash. I only wanted the evidence. I never meant for you to lose your memory." He looked at Emily. "I told everyone Grace abandoned you. It was easier than admitting what I'd done." The hallway fell silent. Victor slowly reached into his coat. Several officers raised their weapons. He carefully removed the silver locket. Nothing more. He walked toward Emily. With trembling hands, he placed it in hers. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I'm tired of lying." Without another word, he turned himself over to the police. No struggle. No escape. No more secrets. As officers led Victor away in handcuffs, Grace opened the silver locket. Inside was a tiny family photograph. Grace, her late husband, and little Emily, wrapped in the same blue blanket. The very blanket Grace had carried through 23 years of homelessness. Never realizing, She had been protecting the truth the entire time. 6 months later, the railway bridge where Grace had once slept looked very different. Volunteers gathered there every weekend, not to walk past people in need, but to help them. A new community outreach center stood nearby. Above its entrance was a simple sign: Grace House, a place for people who had been forgotten, just as Grace once had been. Inside, Grace laughed as Lily chased children through the hallway. Daniel, now fully recovered, volunteered every Saturday. Emily stood beside her mother, helping families rebuild their lives. The old blue blanket rested inside a glass display case, not as a symbol of poverty, but as proof that courage, love, and truth can survive even the darkest chapters of a person's life. Because sometimes the world sees a homeless woman, when in reality, it is looking at someone who never stopped being a mother, someone who carried hope, even when she had forgotten her own name. And in the end, the truth didn't just give Grace her memories back. It gave a daughter her mother, a father his faith in humanity, a little girl a lifelong hero, and a city a reminder never to judge a person's worth by what they've lost. Sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones the world never bothers to see. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe and turn on notifications for more emotional stories filled with unforgettable twists. And before you go, answer this in the comments. If you had walked past Grace under that bridge before the accident, would you have stopped to help her? Because sometimes, one act of kindness doesn't just change one life. It changes generations.